Hi there. Welcome to Calgary, Alberta, the largest city in the Canadian prairies. It is the 22nd of June, which means it's the day after the solstice and Indigenous Peoples Day here in this country. Beautiful blue sky day. We have a short but intense summer. But for a long time, I've been wanting to do a brief talk about this statue, this monument behind me, because it's both fascinating and troubling. So Canada's created as a country in 1867, and Fort Calgary is established in 1875 at the confluence of the Bow and the Elbow rivers. The trains arrive in 1883. But of course, this is Treaty 7 territory, the land of the Blackfoot First Nations Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, Stoney Nakoda First Nation, and indeed the Métis Treaty 3. People have lived out on the plains here for thousands of years and principally harvested bison. This statue here came as a gift to Calgary in 1968. In 1967, the city of Montreal hosted the World Exposition, and that was really Canada's coming of age, the 100-year anniversary of Canada becoming a country. And it was part of the British Pavilion at the time. Now, when it arrived in Calgary, it was apparently somewhat controversial because everyone was naked, and Calgary was pretty conservative at that time. But also, they didn't really know how to assemble it. And so that's where this, and it is entitled The Family of Man, was put in this sort of circular position. Now, it's out front of what was the Board of Education building. That is a story unto itself because that building was condemned after the 2013 floods. It was basically destroyed, so that's a different story. But this statue was put out here, and it's interesting to look at. And of course, as a local guide, it's always been fun to talk about the fact that some citizens wanted them to be clothed at the time. But really, there's a deeper story in here, and it's a deeper story to talk about out here. So these statues, as they were assembled at the British Pavilion at that time, were meant to symbolize how Britain brought, and I quote, civilization to the rest of the world. Now, it's not a case of revisionist history. Obviously, Great Britain or the United Kingdom achieved a huge amount as a country through the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries into the 20th century, fought a horrendous war in the 1940s, but also returned to places like India, fully expecting to take over and maintain control of literally millions and millions and millions of people, hundreds of millions of people. And this idea that this statue or these statues stood there in Montreal, the second largest French-speaking city in the world, as a monument to the fact that civilization had been brought to them, gives us a moment of pause to think of what colonization really looked like for so many people around the world. I like to think that as a society, we are a little more united than we used to be globally. But it's only the last few years in this country that we're starting to come to terms. What we called a Truth and Reconciliation was published in 2016. And then, of course, we started finding unmarked graves at the Indian residential schools, particularly across the west of this country. That's what this bringing of civilization actually looked like. The difficult but important word to bring forward is, in fact, genocide. Now, I am here as a Canadian of settler roots. I am speaking English and I do speak French. So that's all a factor of that colonial process. But as is often said, we must tell the truth about the history of colonization the world over in order to continue or start the process of healing. And so it's not that long ago, in the late 1960s, that there was still this grandiose sense of civilizing the uncivilized in the world. And that's really what this monument was about. Now, as we know as a people, what unites us globally, certainly genetically, is much greater than anything that divides us. But it's not very long ago, and in some quarters, there are still people who advocate for active racism, an active sense of superiority. So the family of man, or as we say, the family of humankind, I think is much better seen as a struggle for equal rights and equal equality and a collective sense of humanity. So those are just a few thoughts on this particular monument here. I'm in downtown Calgary. Look at these modern towers, monuments to, of course, economic vibrancy, overall economic success. But walking around even a wealthy city like this, you still see people who are struggling, who struggle with homelessness, and it's important to remember that inequality is still quite profound amongst us. So there it is, the family of man from the 1967 World Exposition in Montreal. Thank you for this brief visit. Peace and love.